Hey, what's going on? Beyond the Vision podcast. Welcome to another episode. And I brought my sister from another mother onto the scene, Miss Anne Lauren. Y'all probably seen us in our Me Too event that we hosted, a year or two ago? We hosted a Me Too event and really came out speaking about creating a voice for yourself, no matter what type of trauma, pain, what you've been through. Understand that your voice matters. Understand that your story matters. Nobody can tell your story like you tell your story. Nobody can tell you about your story than how you tell your story. And so I wanted to bring her onto the scene with you guys so you can hear more about her. This is about you, and you know what I'm saying? Super dope. She done transitioned in Washington. She done been all around the world. While I was on deployment, I hit her up. She in New York. She back in Washington. Now she's in Cali living her best life. So go ahead and introduce yourself, kind of tell them what you do now, and then we're going to start and get down this road of history.
Hi, everyone. Shirkydra, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here with you, as always. I am an author and activist. I share my story of childhood incest and illness in order to encourage survivors to seek healing, in order to build awareness around how common incest is in the world, and to really encourage the safety of the next generation of children. I'm published on over 25 platforms, as well as provide writing consultation services for people looking to publish their stories, as well as spiritual support services. I have a master's in theological studies, kind of focused on women's spirituality and counseling. So that's what I'm currently working on. I live in San Diego. As you said, I just moved here last October, and I'm really, I grew up in Orange County, not too far from here. So it's been really great to be back in Southern California, and close to the sun, the sand, and the sea, which are all my favorite things. But I certainly miss you, and I very much miss Washington.
So hold on, guys, because I didn't know you had a master's in theology. Like, we never talked about that. You kind of kept that from me, but it's cool. We'll get to that. When did you get that?
2009 to 2011. So
what made you pick that subject though?
Well, my undergraduate degree is also in theology. So my undergraduate degree was in Catholic theology, and then I took a gap year between my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree, and volunteered in El Salvador for a year, and then came back and got my graduate degree and focused on the intersections of women's spirituality and Ignatian spirituality, which is a particular spiritual methodology developed by St. Ignatius of Loyola, who's the founder of the Jesuit order. The Jesuit order runs the schools like Boston College, Loyola Marymount, Santa Clara, Seattle U. So that's what I studied.
I love it. I think that's super dope. That just adds to that dopeness that we talk about. And I'm going to say that all the time just because I did that when you recorded me on your podcast. I said super dope like 10,000 times because we was acting up. But I kind of want to get into your story. I want you to give them kind of a synopsis of like, what makes you the activist that you are? Why do you press so hard on creating a voice for people who have dealt with stories like ours? Like, tell them a little bit about what you went through as a child.
Yeah. So I had a lot of illness as a child, kind of first and foremost. So surgeries and seizures before the age of 5, and then lived a really privileged life. Like, grew up in a white, wealthy family in Newport Beach, California, and started to really have some like mental health issues after puberty, managing depression, anxiety, some kind of compulsive picking and scratching disorders. And therapy was super stigmatized at the time. So like getting help was not an option. And then went to college. And as soon as I moved out of my parents' house, my body, brain, and being just started shutting down. So I started having wild night terrors of rape almost every night. I could hardly function, had chronic fatigue. The depression and anxiety were debilitating. And by the time I walked across my graduation stage, I could hardly function. I was sleeping almost all day, every day, and maybe functioning a few hours just to get what I needed to get done. So started going to more doctors to manage kind of the psychosomatic symptoms, but they all came back and said, there's nothing structurally wrong with you. We don't know what's going on. And then also started going to therapy and working with spiritual directors and like really trying to understand what is the root of all this suffering. I mean, I know I had illness, and can illness cause this level of shame and self-deprecation, which we know now as more and more people become trauma-informed, that of course it can. But when I was 24, that's when the memories came back. Actually, in grad school, I had physical distance from my family. I had figured out how to become financially independent from my wealthy father. And finally, my system felt safe enough to show me the memories, and that I was an incest survivor of a number of men in my family. And that was really the root, both kind of the consequences of illness as well as the repressed incest was really the root of my systemic, my body shut down. So unfortunately, I have a story that a lot of incest survivors have where I told my family, they sided with my perpetrator. And so I really was forced to choose my family and my safety and myself over my family. So I left my family at 24 and have been rebuilding my life really ever since, learning how to reconsolidate traumatic memories, learning how to manage still really, really challenging mental health issues, learning how to financially support myself within professional systems that remain very kind of patriarchal and reflect hierarchies that don't often feel safe to my system. And just trying to find peace and happiness like everybody else wants to find within a world that isn't really built to keep women safe, to keep people with mental health issues safe, to keep people with lots of other issues, or to protect other marginalized, diverse populations. So I really want to use my story and my privilege and my voice to help open doors, to help other survivors share their stories, to help incest survivors in particular come out of hiding. We're still a really marginalized group within the rape recovery movement, and to encourage cultures of safety, cultures of healing, and really cultures of peace, so that the next generation of children can live, I think, in the world we deserve to live in, not the world that we have to survive in.
And I want to kind of, before we kind of move forward, because a lot of people, I know when I tell my story, I can tell it. And I remember when I was talking to my mom the first time, a lot of people never asked me to paint them that picture. But in this moment, from that young little girl till the last time, I can paint every single picture. I can remember, I can recall, but what it does to me now is totally different than what it did to me before. It was like, once I saw that picture, I saw that picture through the night. I saw that picture through the day. I woke up to that picture. It was those pictures in my head, but now it's in a sense where I remember where I was. I remember who I was in that moment and saying that you're not there anymore. You're not that little girl anymore. You're not weak. You're not manipulated. You're not shameful. You're not that. But in your case, what I'm thinking about is it's almost like our friend Sue, and I love Sue, but I love her for how she talks about her story, and you and her are more the same, where your story came back to you later. Mm-hmm. Like, how was it for you? Like, it wasn't that you lived through a truth that you didn't get to acknowledge until 24 years old. Like, those stages were just missed. Like, wake up one day and now it's like all of this comes to you in a hit. Like, how did you embrace that in that moment of how did this happen to me and I not remember?
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking that question because it was really hard. I had to learn to be a victim. I had to learn to identify as an incest survivor, and to trust my memories. I had to learn to study the brain and the neurological effects of trauma. And I really came to understand betrayal trauma theory, which is the idea that children are not able to hold both the complexity that their provider is also their perpetrator. And so they bury the memories of perpetration in their subconscious because their father or their mother or who's ever hurting them is also the one feeding them. So my little brain was brilliant to do that, right? And then to really learn to understand why my memories weren't false. False memory syndrome is an idea that has been used throughout history to really gaslight and continue to kind of disclaim the truth of incest survivors or developmental trauma survivors. And so what I did was I just started studying the patterns in my family system. And it became very clear to me that incest is a generational issue in my family system, and that the patterns of perpetration, of narcissism, of codependency are all by the book. That families where incest thrives was my family by the book. Lots of power issues, wealth issues, sexism, mental health issues, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, suicide. It was all there, and kind of spiritual validation of patriarchal violent principles. And so it was just easier and easier for me to trust myself the more I understood those patterns and studied those patterns.
Did this, and I'm not going to shift scope here, but like, when I hear all the words that you're saying, it makes me think about relationships. When you were in relationships, how impactful in all areas, like how did this, I would say, affect your relationships with people? And I mean intimate and friendships. Like how did it really impact a person who probably didn't know everything? Or did you go in relationships automatically telling your story?
Yeah. So before the incest memories came out, at least romantically, I was abstinent. So I grew up in a very conservative Catholic family and was taught that to value my virginity as my highest form of holiness and purity. And so now I know that my kind of stubbornness around abstinence was really a coping mechanism to protect my brain from receiving the memories too soon. Because I just imagine if I would have had flashbacks of the incest before I was financially independent from my father, that would have been really hard for me to manage, understanding that my perpetrator was my abuser and that I was still dependent on him and living off of him. So that was how I kind of managed romantic relationships. And then once the memories came back, at that point, everyone in my life knew that something was wrong. Like I was so sick. And so we were all kind of like waiting on the edge of our seats for some sort of diagnosis. And when the memories finally resurfaced, there was almost a part of me that was relieved, because it was like, oh my God, finally I have an answer. And if I have a problem, right, if I can diagnose the problem, then I can figure out solutions. And so I did start telling everybody, and I learned the hard way that like incest is still a really taboo topic, and a lot of people, especially father-daughter incest, a lot of people can't hold it. So I lost a lot of people. I mean, I lost my family. I lost a lot of people from my childhood, a lot of people I grew up with. And then eventually found a lot of people too, like a lot of people who could really hold the complexity of my narrative and really hold me in safe healing spaces, and really model to me corrective experiences about love and about family and about support and about what those things were supposed to look like. So at this point, I'm pretty proud to be single. I ended up kind of experimenting with sexuality as I healed, and just decided that I really love being single, at least for now. And I love the freedom. And you said in the beginning that, I just am very exploratory. And so being single and being free really gives me a lot of opportunity to just do what I want with my life. And I really, really love that. But at this point, I feel really nourished emotionally by friends who have become my family system. And I feel really grateful for the people who have really taken me in and under their wing and love me unconditionally with all my complex survivor parts.
Come through. And I think it's so important that you said that, because for the audience that's out there that's listening, is so many people look for support from bloodline. They look for support within the household first. It don't usually come. I think when I would say when I ran to Japan, I found my safety there years later, but I found people that made me feel safe enough to be like, you don't realize it, but I finna dump everything I have because I trust you. And it's the first time I've been able to trust somebody since that 5-year-old girl. Yeah. It was literally running to safety. It was running, trying to break free from myself. It was running, trying to find a normal, running, trying to find that safe zone that naturally now I give myself. Before I couldn't do that. Before I couldn't even trust. Like I remember when I would be in my barracks room, for those, I'm also in the military out there for those who don't know, but when I say barracks room, it's almost like a dorm room, and I wouldn't even turn the light off. Like when I went to sleep, light had to be on. And I'm in my 20s. And so I think when I started actively searching for a safe zone as I got tired of not feeling safe when I'm up, not feeling safe when I'm sleepy. It's almost like the only peace I had was when I was sleeping. So I would rush to go to sleep. But then when it's time to go to sleep, the anxiety, the fear, all these things come up. And it's like, I'm never at peace. My mind is never at rest. The pictures don't go anywhere. You now, because I'm up, I'm thinking about the reasons why I'm up, and that brings the anger and the hatred and so many other things. But I found my safety in people that made me feel safe without knowing nothing about me, without knowing that history, that pain, that PTSD, that anxiety, that feeling of shamelessness, that feeling of weakness. I wore a demeanor that made me look strong because on the inside, I didn't feel like I was. I didn't feel like I was strong. I built a person that was like, you're going to be strong because you may look strong, even though you feel weak on the inside.
Yeah, I really appreciate that duplicity. I think that happens to a lot of survivors. I also really love you naming the complexity of kind of the emergency healing stage, which is exactly what you're saying. It's like you don't ever get a break from it. You're with your brain and your body and your being all the time, and that your system is trying to, it becomes so dysregulated because it's trying to release so much pain, and it's trying to process, and it's trying to make new neural pathways, and to release the pain from your muscles and do everything it has to do. And even in your dreams, it's working hard, right? Like I would have night terrors about rape all the time because my brain was trying to process all this trauma. And so like you're saying, it was so necessary for me too, to find healing environments that I could just fall into, because my system was doing so much work. And then I was also trying to support myself financially. And then I was also trying to like just get my health back and my energy back. And I was alone, right? Like I was really isolated for a really long time. I remember for years, like my therapist felt like my only friends, and it was so lonely. So I talk a lot about creating cultures of healing where that emergency stage is really normalized, that we don't see that something is wrong with someone, but that something is right with these people. Like people who are acting in these particular ways, their bodies are purging, and that they need places to go to be nourished and held and received, because their systems are doing so much work. And because our economic system, we don't have systemic supports for survivors, or if we do, we have very few systemic supports for survivors. It puts a lot of pressure on us to do everything all at once. And honestly, like it's not sustainable. I've had really intense burnouts throughout my 20s. I'm 34 now, but in the 10 years after the memories came back, every 2 to 3 years, I lose everything and I end up on someone else's sofa and I start over again because my system can't handle it all. And I share that to continue to challenge systemic supports as well, to say like, look, we need more systems to support survivors until they can support themselves again.
And I think the big thing when it came from me for healing is saying like, hey, it's okay to cry. Cry don't go with that demeanor. Literally, when I say this unmask is going to break all this down, and it's literally having to take off the mask of having to be strong all the time. The sexuality, like so many different things that I talked about trying to build this person because of how I felt about myself on the inside. And I had a moment where I had to go through a surgery. And I just remember when I woke up from this surgery and nobody was in this room, and I felt exactly how I felt every time I was in my bedroom. Like you feel alone, you feel cold, you feel this feeling that comes over you. And when you get into that place, it's almost like you're so numb, but yet so vulnerable. And people fear that place. That place sometimes for people is a point of no return. And right now I'm going, I'm getting my degree in psychology, and I've learned so much about the mind and child development and adult development and how the brain works with what happens to our bodies and our minds and what we intake and how we discharge that energy and how we trigger our brain to respond to what we feel. Like it's just so much to it. One thing, one action, one something from somebody you love can change somebody's whole entire life.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest part, for those out there that's just like, where do you start with healing? And a lot of it is saying, one, it's not your fault, forgiving yourself, but also acknowledging, even if somebody said they love you or you looked at them as they love you, they still had a play in the pain that they caused you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I think, when did you get to a point where you said, okay, now that I'm healing? Because at the same time, a lot of people think like, because we speak and we coach and we blog that the healing is over, the healing is done. So when did you get to a point where you says, now I'm going to use my story for the greater good while I'm healing too? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. So hashtag Me Too was really my impetus to be public with my story. I had started sharing on Facebook and other social media platforms before hashtag Me Too, but didn't really have a desire to publish or to be on more public platforms. And then hashtag Me Too happened, and it was like this force, like this tidal wave. And I just had all this energy and it had to come out. And when I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a writer. And then I had not the best teacher in English teacher in high school who like made me feel like it would never happen, that I had no writing skills. And so I put that dream away and then kind of pulled it back out. And I was like, this is, the only way I can address this tidal wave is to put it on a page. And all I wanted to do was write. And so I started a blog, and then survivors reached out to me and they wanted to be published on my blog. So then it became a platform. And then I started to realize that, especially for incest survivors, communal validation is the one thing that's really robbed from us. Besides everything else, that communal validation, complex PTSD is the most common diagnosis for incest survivors, which is a similar diagnosis to genocide survivors, to prisoners of war, to combat veterans. And the one thing that combat veterans, genocide survivors, and prisoners of war have that incest survivors don't is communal validation. So there is a community. If your memories are repressed or you don't remember what happened because it's too intense, there is a community, or it's too hard, like even to hold. There's a community out there that says this happened to me too, this happened to us, and we are here for you. We validate your pain and your experience. For incest survivors before Me Too, we it's the they said, we said dynamic. Often incest survivors' pain is happening behind closed doors between very few people. The perpetrator is working really hard to gaslight and silence the experience of the survivor. Often the family system or the social systems or this criminal justice system are all on the side of the perpetrator, opposed to the survivor. So we have years and years and years of being silenced and being gaslit, and having our stories robbed from us. And all of a sudden, hashtag Me Too was like, no more, right? Like no more. We have communal validation. Like we as a community of survivors are standing up and saying, this is over. We are making this over and we will no longer be silenced. So that felt so empowering for me. But also really heartbreaking, because I kept waiting for incest survivors to be represented within the media's representation of the movement. And it never was. I mean, we learned about sexual violence in sports, in government, in schools, in churches, in the media, in Hollywood, and we never learned about sexual violence in the home. And it broke, right? I mean, it broke my heart because we know that perpetrators choose the most vulnerable members of the population to abuse because they're less likely to tell. And if they do tell, they're the least likely to be taken seriously. And so the more marginalized a population is, the more likely they are to be victimized. Children being the most vulnerable of the population to be victimized by sexual predators. We also know that it's like 98%, I think, of children know their perpetrators in cases of sexual violence, which means that the perpetrator is either related to them or a trusted a trusted person within the family system. So we have data that suggests that children are being victimized. We also have data that suggests from the World Health Organization that incest is an epidemic. It's one of the leading health epidemics, that children who are abused when they're small grow up to have lots of health problems, like I did, like so many people do, and that it's an issue that really remains to be addressed. I have learned from my own story. I used to really want to just heal and have it be over, but what I've learned as I learned to hold the complexity of complex PTSD, I just learned, and because I had epilepsy and seizures, I have kind of more maybe brain trauma than some other survivors, that I have adopted healing as a lifestyle. So I manage chronic PTSD, like people brush their teeth in the morning, and you have to eat. I have to manage my health, and that healing is a constant, and healing is a lifestyle. And the better I can hold myself in love and in compassion, the easier the more I really enjoy my life, opposed to kind of fighting my symptoms. Like there's something that's wrong with me that needs to be fixed, you know?
And I think it's important that the audience, and I've explained this to a lot of people, and this is for somebody out there that think that I'm sorry is going to heal it. One step is going to heal it. One therapy session is going to heal it. Like healing is constant. It's certain nights. Like I have nights, I have days, I have moments where I go back and I'm like, man, I've come a long way, but I'm still moving. Healing, I've got to the stage of forgiveness. I've got to the stage of confronting, the perpetrator. You go through all these stages and you be like, well, man, I did everything and I still feel like this. Like,
I know.
Like, what did I do it for then? You know what I'm saying? I'm still going to be in that place, but it's like, the healing is ongoing. You know what I'm saying? When I think of spirituality and it's like those that endure to the end shall be saved. It's like, it's a forever. It's perseverance. It's forbearance. We talk about meekness. We talk about fruits of the spirit when I come from the spirituality sense. It's all these things together for eternity makes it what it is at the end. And a lot of people feel like, okay, well, if I do all these things, I wake up now, I'm healed, I'm good. I went through the forgiveness and all these things, but it's like, you have to go through so much. And I think I think a lot of the anger and hatred is not from the act as much as it is for what the act has now caused someone in their life. And that's why when I see like young men and women, especially little kids that speak more to gauge, like you have a voice. The sooner you say something, the sooner it stops. The sooner is it addressed, the sooner you can start your healing process. Because I have this like when I can, and I think we've talked about this before. You can go into school and see yourself. You see the kids that's going home and you are dealing with something that nobody knows about. Yeah. You are dealing with a parent. You are dealing with something that's causing you trauma. And it's like you personally can't do nothing about it. And it bothers you because you're living that. You're living the results of that. And it's like when you see it and you're like, man, one day somebody's going to hear that child cry. Somebody's going to see that they're hurting and they're in pain. And like you said, I studied the same thing that shows that when the person that has caused you the pain and the harm is in your circle, in your household, mom, dad, brother, sister, because you're there, it goes to the back of your mind until it's time to be present again. And it's in your adulthood. It's when you're away from that, I'm out of the house now. Now I go back and realize all the trauma. I go back and realize that was abuse. I go back and realize that was wrong.
Right.
And you did that to me. And now you don't want to own up to it. You don't want to say, you don't want to take ownership of it. And so I think that's truly challenging, but I think that's part of why we do what we do and we put our story in front of the public. It's not just about being a speaker or an advocate. We hashtag Me Too all the time, but I remember when we did our event at the boutique and you saw like when it's not about just the tears, but you see the pain that people are in the present that haven't even started their healing process. That's what it's about. Saying like, you haven't even said anything. That's what it's about. Saying like, you're in the household now. That's what it's about. Like I had a teenager, she reached out to me and she's like, when COVID hit, that's the worst thing that could have happened because the person who's raping her is in the household. So now I'm home with this person every single day. Yeah. And it was just like, you better email me video, like whatever that protector mode came on. It's like, but you can't save the world, but you continue to do what it is that we are called to do in that gifted and that purpose. So I think the next thing I kind of want to hit on that we don't talk about, or a lot of people don't get to this stage in their healing process is forgiveness. Mm-hmm. What did that stage look like for you? Or have you reached, do you feel like you've reached that stage? I see that look on your face. You thought I wasn't going there yet. Yeah, you don't know that. Let's talk about that stage right there. Like forgiveness. Like, what is that? What is that for you? What does that look like? Have you hit that stage? Like, you almost there, what we talking about? Like,
my understanding of or my approach around forgiveness is complex. So I'm just going to talk about that. I think that we are currently functioning within a culture of perpetration. And in a culture of perpetration, forgiveness, empathy, compassion, these like really beautiful things are used against the victim in order to keep perpetration cycles repeating themselves. So forgiveness as a concept, when I came out of a conservative Catholic home, and my mother told me when I told her that my father had essentially raped and ruined my life, her response was, well, you should forgive him. God wants you to forgive him, without accountability and without assurance that the next generation would be safe. My mom just wanted to keep the family system together. She didn't want there to be any shame against the family. She didn't want anyone to know my story. And it would have just continued the cycle of violence. So I chose not to forgive for a very long time. What I chose to do instead was to do my healing work, right? So I chose to grieve. I chose to feel my rage. I chose to feel my anger. I chose to acknowledge everything that my father did to me. I also chose to study my family's life, my father's history, my mother's history. Where did they come from? How did they become who they are? Understanding that they too were poly victims, that they were victims of a number of circumstances. That does not excuse their behavior, but certainly helps me to understand their behavior. I also am very compassionate to the fact that psychology is access to therapy, and really good trauma-informed therapy is still a relatively new thing. That my parents' generation, if they did have access, it was still very expensive, or there were still a lot of taboos around it. That's still true today, but I think less true in some communities. So by the time I kind of did all that healing work and really came to understand and hold compassion for my family, I was able to release my anger and my rage against them. I was able to really like hold them in compassion. And I still don't talk to them because they're still not safe, right? Like I chose not to reconcile, which is a different process than forgiveness, because my family system remains. I'm still the problem to them. Like I'm the reason for my family's shame. Like my father is still just a narcissistic, abusive person, like nothing's changed. So I continue to honor myself and my safety. But I remember having this really beautiful dream actually once where my father kept coming to me in my dreams. And sometimes from a spiritual perspective, I believe that like soul visitations can happen in dream states. And so I kept ignoring him. Like every night he'd show up and I would kind of ignore him in my dream. And I didn't really want to talk to him, and I'd wake up. And normally I do dream interpretation sessions where I like talk to the various people who show up to me and like figure out what messages they're trying to send or how they're going to invite me into more healing. But I was not interested in talking to him. I was like, sorry, like go away. So eventually he just like wouldn't leave me alone. Like he kept coming back into my every night. So eventually I just like let myself enter into that kind of dream processing mode. And I imagined myself with him in my waking state. And I was like, what do you want? Like, what do you want from me? Like, I don't want you here. Like, you're not invited into my life. What do you want from me? And he said, I want to say I'm sorry.
Oh.
And Kydra, I lost it. I was bawling. And I realized from, my creative worldview that I have developed as a survivor, because the world doesn't make sense when your father rapes you. And so I give myself the freedom to build my world however I want, is that my father is not capable, at least yet, in saying he's sorry to me. He's not capable of acknowledging he's done something wrong, but that his soul, underneath all of his survivor patterns and all of his pain and all the narcissism that he built as a coping mechanism from growing up in his own violent household, underneath all that is this soul that like really wants me to know that like I deserve to be free of him. And so he came to me in a dream state because that is kind of the realm or the vibrational level that he could visit my soul and say like, look, Anne, I know you don't believe in forgiveness, because the way our culture is structured, it's often used against survivors as a weapon. But in this case, like from a soul to soul perspective, I forgave him, right? It was like, he said he was sorry. And with that apology, I was able to say like, I want my soul to release what you've done to me. I appreciated what you said about like the aggression and the anger, because it's important to remember too that survivors are often very angry because the limbic system, the part of the brain that kind of holds the flight, fight, freeze hormones, like your survival hormones, your stress hormones, it actually structurally changes after too much trauma. It shrinks. Mm-hmm. And a consequence of that is aggression. So if you're really angry all the time, it might not be because you haven't forgiven. Like I've done all the work. And like you're saying, I'm still in a rage, like a lot of days. The rage isn't directed at anybody, right? Like, but I am, because my little amygdala is like so small now. And it's just, aggression is just a consequence. And so I just know that's a part of something I have to manage, and I don't take it out on anyone. And I go on lots of walks, or I scream underwater. I'm an ocean swimmer, right? Like to get that energy out of myself. But I acknowledge that sometimes like the spiritual concept of forgiveness doesn't always, like you're saying, also heal like my brain damage that might cause a little extra aggression in me, So just holding those complexities.
And I think it's true that you said that, because I studied the same thing, like I said, in psychology, and you learn about the neurological system that we have and how the biological, neurological, and psychological, all those mechanisms come together to make you. And I learned I don't care how much a person loved me. I learned my trigger was when you put me, because I was in a non-safe zone. When somebody puts me in a safe zone, I lose how I feel about them, how I gauge it. It's like, you made me unsafe. You allowed that person to put me in an unsafe zone. I don't care about violence, fighting. It's certain things I'll be like, I'm good with that. I know that. That's cool. But it's that unknown, unexpected, because of that control mechanism. My trigger was when you put me in an unsafe position, when you allow somebody who wants to harm me to have access to me now, I feel a certain way. And I saw that in my friendship. I saw that in my relationships. I saw I had to sit last year. It was a big episode for me to sit and be like, you're not upset with them. You're upset because you feel like you was put in an unsafe position and nobody could protect you from it. Right. And it's no matter how spiritual, prayer, fasting, you do all these things. Sometimes you want that physical mechanism that says, I am safe because I'm safe. You can't do nothing to me. You can't touch me. I'm not that little girl anymore. I'm not that weak-minded person. I can say what I mean. I can mean what I say. I can express myself, and nobody can take my expression away. No matter what you said, you didn't want to make me feel like I feel this way, because I feel this way, and can't nobody check me on it. You know what I mean? So it's almost getting into a place where you own what happened, also own the things that are a result of what happened that are in your life now. And no matter what age you get to, no matter where you're headed, no matter how much I've prayed, I've taken it to the altar thousands of times. No matter what, you have to deal with it in all three of those areas, because it has affected all three of those areas. And I think it's important to home in on where you are and where you are not. Everybody wants to heal overnight, forget about it overnight, not think about it, not see it. And it doesn't always work that way for everybody. And I look at Sue, I think Sue was in her 50s when her story came back. Mm-hmm. And it's 50 years old just to have your entire story dumped on you at that time. So I think, it's important to, I think for me, over my past, and what one of my weaknesses was acknowledging my feelings and knowing that my feelings matter as much as my voice matter. I was saying it on stage. I was saying it on camera. I was saying it, but it was nice where I didn't believe it. I didn't believe my feelings. I didn't believe telling this person how I felt it was going to be important enough. I didn't feel like telling this person that made me feel unsafe. And I don't like that. And I will not put myself in an unsafe predicament, and you shouldn't either. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? If you had to tell the 5-year-old you something today, what would you tell it?
I just think it gets better. I think actually I appreciate that question, because I'm still really working with my 5-year-old self. I think that I still have a lot of trauma around that age, because of that was kind of when my seizures got really bad and stuff. And so there was just a lot of, again, compounded trauma between the incest and the illness. And I honestly just wanted to die when I was 5. I just didn't want to survive anymore. And so the more my life becomes really beautiful, and the more I find a safe family system, and the more that I grow in opportunities to share my story and to be an activist and to commit and to connect with other people doing the work I want to do, and the more I have the capacity to just live the life I want to live and to be really free, the more I'm also able to feel like her tragedy and her trauma and how trapped she was and how violated she was and how like her little body just couldn't handle it. You know, it was just way too much for my like tiny system to manage and maintain all that trauma. So there's a element of me saying thank you to her, like, thank you for holding on and like, thank you for surviving like back then. And thank you for going through everything you did so that I could be here and so that I could be free. And then continuing to like hold her level of reactivity and her memories and her physical embodied experience, which I'm still processing in like just so much love and compassion, and know that like I'm not here in spite of my inner child. I am here because of my inner child, you know, like she is not a burden on me. Like she went through so much so that I could one day walk away and then have the privilege to like recover and then find freedom in my own life. And that journey has felt impossible and it has been so hard. And sometimes I still get so angry at like my survival symptoms, but the reality is surviving is a privilege, and that she kicked ass way back when, so that I could have the opportunity to heal. And I'm just like so grateful for her courage. And sometimes I feel like that's what I need, like, especially when trying to build a platform as like a public survivor. Like sometimes I'm really scared and I feel really afraid, and I kind of go to her for courage, and she's just like
for advice, like, hey, I need you to show me. I need you because I can't do it.
That's right. She's like, I didn't survive all this so that you can like sit on your ass and not do anything with your life. Like, get going, sister. You know, she's like my fire. She's just like, I did not go through all this so that you can be like white and complacent and lazy. Like, get it out, like go do something productive.
Yeah. And I ain't gonna lie, some people be like, when I'm on stage, I see the crowd, when I'm on TV and these kids, and you know, children are the hardest crowd because they will make fun of you in front of you. They're gonna do, but I haven't had one of those episodes. Like I'm pretty good with children, but people be like, what do you see when I'm standing on stage, when I'm speaking, when I get nervous, when my palms start sweating, like when I feel like, oh my God, I did not know it's going to be this many people out here. You know, I think about that time where I was about to take my life. I think about looking in the mirror. I think about that little girl that cried when my mom would get out the driveway. I think about all the instances. It's like, if you made it through that, there's nothing in this world that can defeat you, overtake you. It's not easy. But nothing, what was supposed to kill you, what tried to kill you, it didn't do it. It couldn't happen. So there's nothing. You see how, like, you see me on stage, I get hyped, but I mean, there's nothing that can take me out. Like, if you wanted to take me out, devil, you should have took me out a long time ago. Because now your girl's about to show up and act a fool. I can't do it. So I think it's super dope, you know, you doing what you're doing and us being able to connect. And I think about everything that wouldn't have happened in my life if I would have took my life, if I would have let my depression, let my sadness, let my, you know, what I felt at the time were deficits, if I let them win. And if I can encourage anybody else out there that has conquered, that has overcame, that has just been through hell, you get to a point saying that you're an overcomer. You have to speak to your pain and speak to that place and say, thank you. Don't look at that place and see pain. Don't look at that place and see darkness. Don't look at that place and see the lack. Don't look at that place and see the person who did it. Like, you look at that person, you say thank you, because some of us wouldn't be who we are if that didn't happen. I wouldn't be the speaker, the coach. I and me wouldn't exist. My relationships, like, I wouldn't be who I am today, as free as I am, as loving as I am, as caring as I am, as spontaneous. Like, I could not be in this place if I didn't go through all that damn pain. And I'm just being real. And from the spiritual growth to the emotional growth to the mental, everything encompassing. I'm 31 and I'm still learning. I'm still going. I didn't tell my story to, you know, so I was 25 and that was to my family. I was already telling strangers, but to my family. So it's like you get to a point where you choose you choose your happiness. And I've seen you, like, to know your story and hear your story, and people haven't seen the goofiness. That's why let's go do it. Like, what do you mean? Let's just go do it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, let's just go be great. So I think it's super dope who you are, how far you've come, and knowing your story and how free you are from that story, and to tell that story and say, I'm not ashamed of my story. Everybody don't have a voice, but that's why we do what we do, to be a voice for the voiceless and to encourage you and to show you that your voice impacts the world. You have a piece of the pie. If you do not speak, who's going to do it? If we don't do it, how does that young lady, how does that young man say, you know what, you look like me, and if you can do it, I can do it too.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I grew up in a family system that really glorified suffering. And so I really try to like personally shy away from this narrative of being grateful for the incest itself. But I do feel more and more like really proud to be who I am, in spite of what happened to me, and to turn everything that happened into gold, right? To turn everything that happened into something that I can gift to the world, something that I can share with the world. Everything that happened into thinking about all the connections I've made because I'm a survivor, right? Like you and I became friends because of like our #MeToo stories that we found each other on the web, and in New York, you said like I got to go to New York to do an editorial, and just all the amazing people that I've been able to be with in my life because of the complexity of my narrative. And the more I can kind of hold who I've become and the work that I've done and the healing that I've done and the people I've connected to and the relationships I've established and the stories that I've published, the more I'm able to really hold all my parts in love, regardless of the violence done to me.
Well, drop the mic and, just drop. I'm so done with you. You wouldn't do it, my girl. Well,
that's why
I'm so proud of you. I'm excited. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I say meeting the audience out there, and I'm sure somebody got so many gems, and hopefully this really encourage you to create your own voice. And you may not have my story, you may not have Ann's story. Everybody has their own story. Never compare your story to somebody else's, because you have your own voice in your life and in your story. No matter how small you feel or how big you feel, own your story, man, and be who it is you want to be because of your story, in spite of that story. So, and thank you so much for spending time with us. Hopefully, Virginia is up in the air, man. 7 years. I'm gonna tell you, 7, God willing, 7. Virginia got the juice for the next 7. That's all. After that, I don't know where I'm gonna be in the world, but I'm sure that we'll be able to reconnect and be in the same location. But thank you so much for blessing the audience with your presence, with your story, always being authentic, transparent, and you only cried once. I'm so proud of you. Woo! All right, y'all. Until the next episode, keep going beyond that vision, which means going and knowing that there's always something beyond what you see in the moment.